September 2nd, 1898. The plains outside Omdurman, Sudan. Under a brutal African sun, the 21st Lancers of the British Army form a long, thin line across the open ground. 400 cavalrymen sit astride their horses, sabers resting at their sides, waiting for the bugle call that will send them forward at full gallop. The officers believe this will be a simple charge. Intelligence reports suggest only a few hundred enemy fighters ahead, poorly armed, disorganized, already broken by artillery fire. On the far right of the line sits a 23-year-old cavalry officer, slim, intense, already ambitious beyond his rank. His name is Winston Churchill. Unlike the men around him, Churchill does not rest his hand on a saber. His right arm hangs stiff and awkward at his side. It is badly injured. Churchill's shoulder has been dislocated so many times that he can no longer trust it in combat. One violent swing of a cavalry sword could wrench it out of its socket, leaving him helpless in the middle of a charge. A cavalry officer who cannot use a saber faces a terrifying reality: mounted combat at close range, with no reliable weapon. So Churchill has made a decision no other British officer has made that day. Instead of a sword, he grips a German semi-automatic pistol, the Mauser C96. It is an unusual choice, controversial, even improper by the standards of Victorian military tradition. But Churchill is not thinking about tradition. He is thinking about survival. The bugle sounds. 400 horses surge forward. And in the next few minutes, Winston Churchill's life, and history itself, will hinge on 10 rounds of ammunition. Churchill's problem did not begin in Sudan. It began 2 years earlier, on October 2, 1896, in Bombay Harbor. As Churchill disembarked at Sassoon Dock, his boat suddenly lurched away from the stone steps. Instinctively, he grabbed an iron ring to steady himself. The movement was violent and uncontrolled. His body twisted as the ship pulled away, and his right shoulder took the full force. The joint tore. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but the long-term consequences were far worse. The injury never healed properly. Churchill's shoulder became what doctors would later describe as chronically unstable. It dislocated while he slept. It dislocated when he reached for books on high shelves. It dislocated during polo matches so often that Churchill designed a leather harness to strap his elbow to his waist just to keep playing. In his memoir My Early Life, Churchill admitted the injury would haunt him forever. It would prevent him from playing tennis, embarrass him in moments of physical exertion, and, most dangerously, endanger him in moments of violence and peril. For a cavalry officer, this was disastrous. British cavalry doctrine was built around cold steel. Sabers were not merely weapons. They were symbols of centuries of military tradition. Officers trained for years to strike accurately at speed, cutting and thrusting from horseback in tightly controlled formations. A cavalry officer who could not swing a sword was, quite simply, at risk of being killed. When Churchill received orders to join the 21st Lancers for the Sudan campaign against Mahdist forces, he knew his injured shoulder posed a deadly problem. He would be expected to ride into combat with a saber like every other officer. And he knew he could not rely on it. Before departing for Egypt, Churchill went shopping. In London, he visited John Rigby and Company, a well-known gunmaker and dealer. There, he purchased at least 2, possibly 3 Mauser C96 semi-automatic pistols, along with a substantial supply of ammunition. At the time, the Mauser C96 was one of the most advanced handguns in the world. It offered something no British service revolver could match. 10 rounds. Fired rapidly. Without reloading. The standard British sidearm was the Webley revolver, a solid, reliable weapon, but limited. 6 rounds. Heavy trigger pull. Slow reloads that required individual cartridges to be inserted by hand. In the chaos of a cavalry charge, that difference could mean everything. Churchill understood this intuitively. If he carried a Webley and ran out of ammunition mid-charge, he would have to fumble with loose rounds while enemies swarmed around him at arm's length. One mistake would be fatal. The Mauser offered a different equation. 10 rounds in an integral magazine, loaded quickly using a stripper clip. A powerful, high-velocity cartridge. And the ability to fire again and again as fast as he could pull the trigger. During the long journey up the Nile, Churchill practiced obsessively. He drilled himself in drawing, firing, reloading. He prepared for the moment when his injured shoulder would be irrelevant, and the pistol would decide whether he lived or died. That moment came on September 2 ND. The charge began under a catastrophic misunderstanding. British commanders believed they faced perhaps 150 to 200 enemy fighters, visible on the open plain ahead. What they could not see was what lay concealed in a dry riverbed, a corps, cutting across their path. Hidden there were 2,000 to 2,500 Mahdist warriors, armed with swords, spears, and rifles, waiting until the cavalry was fully committed. When the lancers thundered forward, the trap was sprung. What should have been a brief skirmish became a violent collision at full speed. Churchill later described the scene with vivid clarity. Warriors rose suddenly from the ground almost beneath the horse's hooves. One man threw himself flat, attempting a hamstring cut at Churchill's horse, a technique designed to bring the animal down and leave the rider helpless. Churchill fired at close range. Another enemy appeared, sword raised, so close that Churchill barely had space to aim. He fired again, the pistol barrel nearly striking the man's body. A third figure staggered toward him, already wounded by lances, spear lifted for a final strike. Churchill fired again. The fighting was frantic, chaotic, and intimate. There was no time to think, only to react. Churchill emptied his magazine and reloaded the Mauser the moment he had a second to breathe. His brother Jack later wrote to their mother that Winston had sheathed his saber at the sound of the charge and gone into battle using his Mauser alone. After several shots, the enemy no longer closed on him. They stayed away. The numbers from that day reveal the scale of the disaster. In 2 minutes, the 21st Lancers suffered 22% casualties. 21 men killed. 50 wounded. They inflicted roughly 400 enemy dead. Churchill emerged without a scratch. His shoulder did not dislocate. His pistol did not jam. The weapon performed exactly as he needed it to. Churchill understood the irony immediately. Later, he wrote that if he had been able to use a sword instead of being forced to adopt a modern weapon like a Mauser pistol, his story might not have gone much further. The man who would lead Britain through its darkest hour survived his first taste of true combat because of a German pistol and a damaged shoulder. What Churchill could not have known was that the weapon he holstered that day would go on to fight in more than 30 conflicts, across 5 decades, on 3 continents. And that its story was only just beginning. The weapon that saved Winston Churchill on the plains of Omdurman did not begin as a celebrated military project. In fact, it began as an idea its own company leadership did not want. In the early 1890s, inside the Mauser factory at Oberndorf am Neckar, 3 brothers worked quietly in the experimental workshop. Their names were Fidel, Friedrich, and Joseph Federle. Fidel served as superintendent of the shop, while his younger brothers assisted in design and machining. Together, they were exploring something radical for its time, a self-loading pistol. Most military handguns of the era were revolvers. Reliable, yes, but slow to reload and limited in firepower. The Federle brothers believed the future lay in semi-automatic operation, adapting principles already being tested in self-loading rifles to a compact, handheld weapon. Paul Mauser, the owner of the company, initially dismissed the idea. He saw no commercial value in semi-automatic pistols and ordered the brothers to focus on rifle development, where military contracts and prestige lay. They ignored him. Working in spare moments, convinced they were on the edge of something revolutionary, the Federle brothers continued refining their design. By 1894, the prototype had advanced far enough that Paul Mauser could no longer deny its potential. He approved further development, and promptly filed the patent under his own name in December 1895. The first functional prototype was completed in March 1895. Serial production began the following year. The pistol was designated C96, construction 96, and it looked like nothing the world had ever seen. The Mauser C96 was instantly recognizable, and deliberately unconventional. Its integral box magazine sat forward of the trigger guard rather than inside the grip, giving the weapon a top-heavy, almost unbalanced appearance. The barrel was unusually long for a pistol, measuring 140 millimeters. The grip itself was a rounded wooden cylinder that earned the weapon its most famous nickname, the broom handle. Internally, The pistol was a triumph of German precision engineering. The barrel and upper receiver were machined from a single steel forging. Parts fitted together with remarkable tolerances, requiring surprisingly few screws for such a complex mechanism. This was not a cheap design. It was not a simple design. It was a design built on the belief that precision equals reliability. What truly set the C96 apart, however, was its ammunition. The 7.63 by 25 mm Mauser cartridge was revolutionary. With muzzle velocities approaching 1,400 to 1,450 feet per second, it was the fastest commercially produced pistol round in the world. No revolver cartridge could match its speed, penetration, or effective range. At the muzzle, energy approached 400 foot-pounds, giving the pistol stopping power and penetration unheard of in handguns at the time. With the wooden holster attached as a shoulder stock, the C96 could accurately engage targets out to 200 meters, transforming it into something closer to a light carbine than a pistol. Magazine capacity was 10 rounds, loaded from the top using stripper clips. A trained shooter could empty the magazine in under 5 seconds. This was the future of handgun firepower. Despite its advanced design, the Mauser C96 faced a major obstacle. The German army did not want it. During official trials, the C96 was tested against another revolutionary pistol, the Luger P08. The Luger was lighter, better balanced, and easier to handle one-handed. Its detachable magazine allowed faster reloads under stress. German evaluators judged the Mauser to be awkward, poorly balanced, and unnecessarily complex. In 1908, the German army officially adopted the Luger. The C96 was rejected. But rejection by Germany did not mean failure. It meant opportunity. When World War I erupted in 1914, theory collided violently with reality. The German army had adopted the Luger, but could not produce enough of them. Every month brought requests for more pistols than factories could deliver. Officers, artillery crews, machine gun teams, aviators, and vehicle crews all needed sidearms. Desperation forced a reversal. In 1915, the German military placed a massive order with Mauser, 150,000 C96 pistols. This created a serious logistical problem. The Luger fired 9 mm parabellum ammunition. The standard C96 fired 7.63 mm Mauser. Supplying 2 pistol calibers to frontline troops was a nightmare for quartermasters, and potentially deadly loading the wrong ammunition into the wrong pistol could destroy the weapon and injure the shooter. Mauser's solution was brutally simple and unmistakable. They produced C96 pistols chambered in 9 mm, and marked them clearly by burning a large red numeral 9 into the wooden grips. These became known as the Red 9 pistols. Approximately 137,000 Red 9s were delivered before the war ended. The pistol Germany had rejected now armed German soldiers across Europe. On the Western Front, the C96 found its niche. Trench warfare erased traditional battle lines. Combat occurred at arm's length, around corners, in dugouts and tunnels. In these conditions, volume of fire mattered more than elegance. 10 rounds of rapid semi-automatic fire could overwhelm an enemy before he could react. German stormtroopers valued the C96 during trench raids, where speed and surprise decided survival. With the wooden stock attached, the pistol offered accuracy beyond that of revolvers, allowing engagement across trench systems. But the weapon also revealed its weaknesses. The exposed bolt collected mud and debris. The complex mechanism was difficult to clean under combat conditions. Partial disassembly required time and care, luxuries rarely available at the front. As true submachine guns like the Bergmann MP-18 appeared, the C96's role diminished. The future belonged to weapons designed specifically for close-quarters combat. Even so, Mauser experimented. They developed a trench carbine variant with extended magazines, attempting to bridge the gap between pistol and submachine gun. Fewer than 40 were produced before the idea was abandoned. The age of the submachine gun had arrived. Beyond Germany, the Mauser C96 spread rapidly. The Ottoman Empire purchased early examples in 1897 for palace guards. These weapons later appeared at Gallipoli, carried by Ottoman officers against British and Anzac forces. Italian troops encountered C96s in the hands of Austro-Hungarian mountain units along the Isonzo front, where compact weapons were favored in harsh alpine terrain. Between 1896 and 1937, Mauser produced roughly 1 million C96 pistols. Spanish manufacturers like Astra added tens of thousands more. The weapon traveled everywhere. But nowhere did it become more important, more iconic, than in China. There, the Mauser C96 would stop being just a pistol. It would become an army's standard weapon. In China, the Mauser C96 became something it had never truly been in Europe. It became standard issue. No other nation in history adopted the broom-handle pistol on such a scale. The reasons were not technical alone. They were political, economic, and born of desperation. Between 1916 and 1928, China descended into the chaos of the warlord era. Power fractured. Armies formed around individual generals. Modern rifles were difficult to acquire. European powers tightly controlled rifle exports, fearing instability. Pistols, however, slipped through the cracks. And the Mauser C96 offered something no other handgun could. With its wooden shoulder stock attached, it could reach 100 to 200 meters with reasonable accuracy. It was not a rifle, but it was close enough. Between 1919 and 1936, an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 Mauser C96 pistols were imported into China. Entire divisions were armed with them. Chinese arsenals soon began producing their own copies, some crude, some excellent. The Chinese called it the box cannon. It became a symbol of power. Warlords posed for photographs with C96s prominently displayed. Revolutionary leaders carried them as badges of modern resistance. The pistol appeared in opera, posters, and later films, cementing its image as the weapon of authority and rebellion. Both sides of China's long civil struggle relied on it. Nationalist forces under Chiang Kai-shek carried German-made Mausers. Communist fighters under Mao Zedong carried them as well. Zhu De, future commander of the People's Liberation Army, wielded a personalized C96 during the Nanchang Uprising of 1927. That pistol still sits in a museum in Beijing today. When Japan invaded China in the 1930s, thousands of Mausers were captured and redistributed to occupation troops and puppet forces. Some of those weapons would later be captured again, this time by American soldiers in the Pacific. The Mauser's journey now spanned continents. While China embraced the C96, Germany quietly moved on. By the late 1930s, the pistol was officially obsolete. Production ended in 1937. Germany transitioned to the Walther P38, and millions of Lugers still filled holsters. The broom handle should have faded into history. Instead, it went back to war. When World War II erupted in 1939, demand once again exceeded production. Germany issued whatever pistols it had. In 1942 alone, more than 19,000 C96 pistols were reissued to Wehrmacht units. The Luftwaffe purchased thousands more for pilots and vehicle crews. Some pistols dated back to 1916. Fathers had carried them in World War I. Now sons carried them into World War II. Special units valued them most. Waffen-SS formations favored the select-fire M712 Schnellführer, capable of fully automatic fire at nearly 900 rounds per minute. Reconnaissance teams, naval infantry, and Brandenburg commandos carried them for close-quarters fighting where intimidation and firepower mattered more than elegance. The Mauser's final battlefield evolution was brutal and ironic. The weapon that saved Winston Churchill was now used against resistance fighters, partisans, and civilians across occupied Europe. History showed no mercy. In the Soviet Union, the Mauser C96 occupied an even stranger role. During the 1920s, Weimar Germany and Soviet Russia cooperated secretly to bypass the restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles. German weapons flowed east. Soviet officers carried Mausers throughout the Civil War and Stalinist purges. So closely associated did the broom handle become with Bolshevik authority that Soviet cinema adopted it as visual shorthand for revolutionary power. More importantly, the Mauser's ammunition lived on. The Soviet 7.62 by 25 mm Tokarev cartridge was directly derived from the Mauser round. That cartridge fed legendary weapons like the PPSH-41, produced in over 6 million units. Every burst fired by Soviet submachine guns on the Eastern Front echoed German engineering from the 1890s. The weapon Germany built helped shape the ammunition that helped destroy Nazi Germany. Another irony history never explained, only recorded. When Allied soldiers encountered the Mauser C96, it felt exotic. It did not look like a Luger. It did not look like a Walther. It looked almost unreal. American and British troops captured them across Europe and the Pacific. Some were German-issued. Others were Chinese copies taken from Japanese forces. Many traveled home in duffel bags as trophies. Most were never fired again. Ammunition was rare. Spare parts non-existent. The Mauser became a mantelpiece relic, its long, violent story invisible to those who admired it. But the pistol's final transformation was still to come. In 1977, a low-budget science fiction film went into production in England. The director wanted the future to look used, not shiny or clean. The production designer searched antique shops and surplus stores for objects that could be transformed into weapons from another world. In a London shop, he found a Mauser C96. It was cut down. A rifle scope was mounted on top. A machine gun flash hider was attached to the muzzle. The result was Han Solo's blaster. The film was Star Wars. The broom handle, already a veteran of revolutions, empires, executions, and world wars, became the most famous science fiction weapon ever put on screen. A pistol born in 1896 now belonged to a galaxy far, far away. The Mauser C96 was a weapon full of contradictions. Awkward, ill-balanced, slow to reload, and yet accurate, powerful, reliable when it mattered most. It proved that semi-automatic firepower could decide life and death in seconds. It showed that 10 rounds were better than 6. It stood at the crossroads between revolvers and modern pistols, pointing toward the future without fully becoming it. John Browning's designs would ultimately win that future. But the Mauser would win history. September 2, 1898. The plains outside Omdurman. A young cavalry officer grips a German pistol because his shoulder has failed him. He fires 10 times. He survives. The world changes because of it. 60 years later, that same man will stand before Britain and promise never to surrender. And none of it would have happened if a shoulder had not been injured, and if a strange, ugly, revolutionary pistol had not existed. The Mauser C96. The German pistol that saved Winston Churchill. The broom handle that armed 3 continents. The weapon that fought in both world wars, on both sides. And the gun that looked so strange, it became a legend in history and fiction alike.